Well, hello, With Gratitude Matt listeners. My name is Matt Moran, and I'm the host for the With Gratitude Matt show. We have a really fun show for you today. With Valentine's Day right around the corner, we thought it would be fun to do a show centered around paying gratitude towards your spouse or significant other. We talk about gratitude a lot on the With Gratitude Matt show. In fact, we talk about practicing gratitude regardless of how powerful that storm is. Inside your own relationship, we thought it might be good to practice that same philosophy. No relationship is perfect. However, if you find gratitude in the relationship that you're in today, regardless of how powerful that storm is, gratitude will in fact expand in that relationship. Today's guest is our good friend, Dr. Cara Hurley. Dr. Hurley is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than a decade of specialized training and expertise in cognitive behavioral therapy. In addition to CBT, Dr. Hurley has a background in health psychology. Her current practice covers a broad range of concerns, including anxiety, depression, relationship issues, life transitions, parenting approaches, grief, and trauma. Dr. Hurley graduated with a BA in psychology from Boston College and completed her PhD in clinical psychology from Loyola University in Chicago. Dr. Hurley did an internship and fellowship at Northwestern University Medical School, where she served as chief postdoctoral fellow during her fellowship year. She is a co-author on the workbook Treating Affect Phobia, a manual for short-term dynamic psychotherapy. She and her husband, Pat, have 2 children and live today in Hinsdale, Illinois. Dr. Hurley, I'm so grateful to have you on the show. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt, and don't call me Dr. Hurley. Just call me Cara.
No, I will. But
So good to see you.
it is so good to see you as well, Cara, and we miss you. And hope to see you soon when this pandemic's over. So I thought a good place to start, and we've got this Hallmark holiday right around the corner from us, and you're going to have spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, buying flowers, chocolates, you name it, for that one day. But we live in a life that has 365 days. And I'm just curious from your perspective, is there, just to get things kicked off, is there one thing that you might ask our listening audiences to think about, things that they might be able to bring to the other 364 days, such that their life is, paying kind of tribute to their spouse or significant other more frequently than just that Hallmark holiday?
I love that you're calling it a Hallmark holiday, because indeed it is. And
Yep.
flowers are more expensive Valentine's Day than any other time of the year.
Yep.
I love this question because one of the things that we know about relationships, and forgive me if I geek out here for a moment, is when we're new in a relationship, our pleasure neurotransmitters, the reward area of our brain, we've heard a lot about dopamine, like they are on fire. We are just getting lots of squirts of dopamine. Some other neurotransmitters are involved as well. And so we're just so in love. We're so happy to do anything and everything for that new person. And, how do we do things to sustain our relationship? Because, by the way, that pleasure center of the brain, after some months, 6 months-ish, it just goes away. We don't have that same excitement that we have in the beginning of relationships. So, what do we do? So in our relationships, anything from, to borrow from the title of your podcast, showing gratitude. So, kind of showing appreciation. One of the easiest things that I really like to do, and it's been associated with improvements in mood, improvements of feeling toward the relationship, is like starting this end of day naming 3 things that either you're grateful for or that that were positive for you in the day. And you can text that to your spouse. and they text it to you, and and trying to do that, it obviously it would take some time to form that into a habit, but it's just a wonderful way to kind of focus on these small things, not huge things. So for example, oh, I got to see the sunrise. Oh, it was just stunningly beautiful. Oh, I loved how you made me my cup of coffee this morning. Small things, but that is going to give you that feeling of love and connection. um just noting, like, what are the rituals that you have, or can you recreate rituals? um so my husband Pat will, I'm kind of boring with what I drink, but he always makes sure I have a full glass of water. He'll just I mean, and that's lovely. Or perhaps we might have a ritual at the end of the day where we come together and we kind of talk about things for a little bit. So what are those small things that we can do? um Another one that's super small but's really cool and gets you another neurotransmitter that is just fantastic is, if you hug for 20 seconds, 20 seconds, you will release, or more, you will release the neurotransmitter oxytocin, which is known as the cuddle hormone. It's what moms release when they're breastfeeding. It's just this feel good hormone, and improves our feelings of attachment, of connection. And I mean, who can't do a 20-second hug?
I love some of those. The problem with, I was thinking of going back to the texting one that you mentioned. My concern might be if I incorporate that with Mary, I might send 3 things that I'm excited about that she did for me. She might not have anything on the back end to return for. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to incorporate that in there. No,
Well,
but I love it.
it doesn't have to be what you did for. It's
Okay.
just, what are you grateful for?
Yep.
You
That's
know,
awesome.
what was positive today? I'm grateful for the sunrise is not anything that Mary did,
Yeah.
unless she's
Yeah.
got some magic going on in Buffalo.
No, 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 no. So listen, I know. So your clients, patients, they don't walk into your office really by design. They find themselves coming in for just challenges that they're faced with, and I'd love to hear maybe from your perspective, what might our listening audience do to avoid having to find themselves in a doctor's office to address relationship issues and that have really spiraled kind of out of control.
Okay. So I'm going to walk you back for a moment,
Yep.
because I think of therapy, and mind you, I probably am a bit biased, but I
Yep.
think of it as a proactive thing to do.
Okay.
So what I love in the Catholic Church, for example, there's pre-cana, which
Yep.
is, for those who aren't married in the Catholic Church, it's, what you go through. I assume you and Mary did it.
Yep.
You did this, some form of workshop where you're looking at, what are your values? How do you negotiate conflict? What are your views on money, kids? Those things that you're supposed to talk about if you're going to commit to someone. And and some pre-canas are better run than others, of course, and they're typically run by lay people who have been married for a long time in the Catholic faith, and obviously you're talking
Right.
about issues of faith as well. But for every single person I meet with, or if you're just a random person I meet and we're having a conversation, I always recommend couples therapy before you commit. So, kind of following that pre-Cana model. So before you even commit to your relationship, or if there's a transition that's occurring in your relationship, a life event that's occurred, you know, be proactive rather than wait. So
Yep.
that's my
Fair
kind of
enough.
plug.
Yep. No,
Just to say,
that makes total sense. It's
you know,
like, yeah, no. Yep.
it's not a bad thing. Like, people can kind of enter, and we do our best work, when we strike, when the iron is cold rather than hot. So hey, we're not in crisis. Let's talk about these things.
Well, I
But
think that, so one of the things I talk a lot about on this show is pay attention to how you're feeding your mind, body, and soul. And I would say that therapy in one part is a way that you're feeding your mind, and so I totally get it. So probably a bad way of asking that question, but
but well, it's just to say, like, we don't have to wait until the wheels are falling off.
yeah. But often people do
People
wait too
do.
long. People do wait too long sometimes.
It's just this is something I think a lot about, and especially in anticipation of our talk today, because we talk about we do kind of reviews, and we know we have to work in every other area of our life. If we're working, we sometimes have these kind of formal reviews on a yearly, monthly, whatever basis. When we think about growing up, we have report cards, we have conferences. When we have anything, we have reviews, and we know that we are working towards goals. We are looking, hopefully non-defensively, at what we're doing. So what can couples do? I mean, part of this is knowing that your relationship doesn't go on autopilot when you get married. And it certainly can have the tendency to go on autopilot when you have children, because you have that much more to take care of, but that you have to devote some time and energy to this. And so, what can couples do? I'm a big believer in, kind of setting a check in of sorts that you have. You can do that on a weekly basis, you can do it on a bi weekly, monthly basis. You figure it out with your partner, but, how's it going? How are you feeling? Because some couples that don't have conflict, it doesn't mean that there isn't anything brewing. Some people just don't want to talk about the thing that might upset their spouse. But if you create a forum of, hey, let's look at these things. How's it going with the kids? How's it going with, the household management, and how we divvy things up? How's it going with us in our relationship? When you kind of set up that kind of process, then that gives you the space to talk through things.
Love it. Love it. So now we sit in pandemic for the last 2 years. Hard to believe it's been that long. And I'd love to hear from your perspective what you've seen the impact of the pandemic has had on relationships and some of the individuals that you might work with.
One more thought,
Yeah.
and then I'll get to that
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
This is kind of related to that question. So, there's research that shows that these like kind of stable couples that are happily married, devote, and this is like a big number and yet not a big number, devote about 6 hours a week towards their relationship. And when you think about it, if you did date night, and even during pandemic, we can do date nights. It's just a little different
Yep.
depending on where you're at with things. But between a date night, between greetings and end of day connection, you add up to those 6 hours. And I'm not talking 6 hours where you're looking at your phone next to your partner, but 6 hours where you're connecting on some level. You can add up pretty quickly, but that number is something to kind of keep in mind. And when you're setting your calendar for everything else, maybe you're setting time in your calendar for, okay, when am I connecting with Mary? How am I
Yeah.
doing this?
I
So,
love it. I love
but
it.
with pandemic, I think, at its worst, I've seen couples who have a tendency to have domestic violence in their relationship, or who kind of fall in what we call the Four Horsemen, which is, and I have a note, so I want to. John Gottman identified these things called the Four Horsemen, which are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. So couples who have that tendency as they navigate conflict, or just how they are with each other, the pandemic's done. It's been horrible. But I think the other thing, like getting away from that, because that's at its worst, I think couples, it's been kind of hard because we're almost seeing too much of each other. There isn't that separation. One of my favorite poems on marriage by Khalil Gibran. Do you know that poem, Matt?
I don't. Not familiar
It's
with it.
beautiful.
No.
Look it up. But
Yep.
it starts in near the beginning. It says, "And let there be spaces in your togetherness."
Yeah.
And it obviously wasn't written during a pandemic.
Right.
So, how do we do that?
Yep.
And that's part of the ritual I talked about. How do you separate? Okay, I'm no longer working, but I don't have my commute to get home. If you're still working from home, okay, well, how do I let my partner know, okay, I'm ready to rejoin the family? But yet you also need those spaces. You need that time to yourself, so that when you're coming together, It's new, it's positive. I think there's just a certain bond that a lot of couples and in turn families have been feeling. And I think along with that, being able to acknowledge, gosh, this is just so hard. And we're so tired. It's been interesting, Matt, for me, because when I've gone through, I've never practiced when everyone's going through the same thing. You know, everyone has their life things, but everyone's living through this, including me. And
Yep.
so the themes week to week are regarding pandemic are often the same, even across couples. They're just often the same. And most recent theme has been with Omicron of just, oh my gosh, I really thought once my kids were vaccinated and we were boosted and what have you, that I would feel okay. And I'm just tired. I'm done.
Everybody's
And
exhausted. Yeah.
everyone's exhausted.
Yep.
So leaning into each other about that,
Yep.
acknowledging that for each other, I think not only has that had an impact, but then it's also a form of strength of when you're able to acknowledge how vulnerable we all feel through this.
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to the day that we can, you know, say it's in the history books. I have no clue when that's going to happen, but really looking forward to it. Cara, when we connected a few weeks ago, I was, one thing that really kind of caught my ear was this ratio that you talked about, the 5-to-1 ratio, talking about 5 positives to 1 negative comment on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
and how often that ratio is flipped the other way, and just being aware of, you know, how you're communicating with your spouse. I love it, and I love to hear, kind of where that came from, and perhaps if you can just share any more color around how others can practice that 5-to-1 ratio, 5 positives to 1 negative.
Yeah, so that came out of, and I mentioned before, John Gottman is this like couples researcher whose work spans over 4 decades. So he studied like over 3,000 couples at this point longitudinally. So he looked at couples who were in conflict, and for a 15-minute period of time, he made them talk about a conflict, I should say. And what he found was these couples that he ended up terming master couples, even during conflict, had 5-to-1 during conflict, which I don't want to think about me and Pat during conflicts. I'm like, oh, I'm not so sure if we're that close. But meaning, they might take a pause. They might kind of laugh. There might be some affection. There may be some comfort as they're negotiating that conflict. It's not just anger and disagreement. And so, whereas couples that were not so masterful, it's a more of a ratio of zero point 0.8 because it's been studied, zero point
Yep.
0.8 to 1, zero point 0.8
Wow.
positive to 1 negative. So not so bad. So, or not so good, I should say. But why this is so important is we often forget because we're not focusing on the good in our relationships always. We often forget to be more demonstrative in how we talk to folks beyond our conflict, but even conflict, like being able to have give ourselves a pause to calm down. But even in our everyday beyond conflict, what the research has found is actually, and because I looked this up after our conversation, because I was like, well, I think it's more. I mean, 5-to-1's good, but in masterful couples that are happily married, it's more like 20-to-1.
Oh my goodness.
I
Wow.
know. Oh my goodness. And this is not just, oh, I think you look great today. Oh, I like that shirt. It's not that. It's just more neutral to positive interaction or commentary as compared to negative or critical.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So, when you approach your day with, oh, I really want to get that ratio. I really want to emphasize that positive. I want that to be a focus. That's my intention. Because guess what? It's going to give me a heck of a lot of good in my relationship. Then it just shifts your mindset with that.
Right.
Think of like small things often. We're not talking about big things. We're not talking about your Hallmark holiday of a dozen
Right.
roses. We're just thinking of small things.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's with I thought I was doing reasonably well with the 5-to-1 ratio. I got a lot of work to get to that 20-to-1 ratio. So, so listen, I want to, obviously you touched briefly on just, you brought it up earlier, just physical abuse, but one of the most damaging things in a relationship, I would think, would be infidelity. And, having said that, I know our Heavenly Father is so understanding, forgiving, nurturing if we go to Him with that sin and truly ask for forgiveness. That being said, oftentimes a spouse's reaction could be quite different than what you might get from our Heavenly Father. Love to hear your perspective on what you've seen from infidelity and perhaps things that maybe we could even do to avoid going down that path.
Yeah. Infidelity is like an earthquake in a relationship. I mean, it is just so destructive, and yet it happens, and it happens more often than we'd like to even think about, and obviously quite damaging. So, just thinking about infidelity itself, there's probably like what I would say two types of affairs. There's like the wake up affair that, that happens in a relationship where the person could be happily married, where they are very committed, maybe not so happy, but they're very committed to their marriage. And it's just kind of a wake up for the couple. And, let's work on things that we haven't been. So how do we avoid? Well, we devote and we work on things before we get there. And then the other type of affair is obviously the breakup affair, where that one member of the couple is just like done. And, and then it's not going to be salvaged.
It's not reconcilable.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. I mean, they happen. But a lot of times, and I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of times people do indeed repair. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I guess what I would say when I was thinking about this and you reference God, one of the things is people can have all sorts of reactions, and that's dependent on trauma history of their own parents, how forgiving they are, how empathic they are. There's a whole bunch of variables, but I think what's so important here is something that we call self-compassion. And are you familiar with that term? Because I feel like it's kind of made it into.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that because obviously that's your relationship with yourself and how you talk to yourself, like trying to talk to yourself the way you would to a dear friend, and being very accepting of your reaction, whatever that is.
Yep.
But, if you think about it, when you have a relationship with God and you're referencing God is forgiving, God is compassionate, God is all these wonderful things, it is also that relationship that you have with God. What would God have to say to me in this time of incredible pain? What would Jesus, whomever the person you'd like to talk to, what would that person, that God have to say to me?
Right. And you touched on, the kind of the wake up kind of situation, or the one that's kind of tearing apart, maybe irreconcilable in that situation. But I'd love to hear your perspective. I should probably disclaimer this comment because Mary's going to listen to this, and we don't have infidelity, fortunately, in our relationship. So I'm asking this question for, some of our other listening audience, perhaps. So when you think about this, I can't imagine being on the receiving end, like having to try to forgive my spouse for that. But I'm sure you've seen spouses that have grown closer as a result of this, very dark place. And I'd love your perspective on what you've seen couples do to actually strengthen their relationship through what could be perhaps perceived as something that is so damaging that we could never ever get over that.
Yeah. It's pretty darn amazing. Because for those that stay together, and most often you're ending up in therapy with an affair. because it's just so damaging. And how do you find your way through?
It's understandable. Yep.
But I would say, I've had more than one individual and or couple say, to use a word that might be surprising, that they are grateful for it. Now, you might say, how the heck would you be grateful for an affair? And when you live through life and life happens, as it often does, you know, you can, in this case, you can kind of find that, wow, we came together and we are stronger as a couple than we were before. We didn't talk through things. I didn't know this about my husband, and this need of his, because he didn't tell me, and now he tells me.
Right.
A lot of times people will call it like a second marriage, but it's within the marriage. It's their second marriage. It's their new marriage. Um, Now, I think anyone that's lived through an affair, I would never say, oh, if you're struggling in your marriage, an affair is a great way of coming together. Just like I would never say, oh, well, if you want to see about gratitude, why don't you get a cancer diagnosis and see how you do with that? Like, it's not like we want people to have hard things.
That's
But
it.
but for those that put the work in, I mean, it's just pretty amazing how much closer you can become as a couple when you've suffered through something like an affair.
I can see that. I mean, in that, like, if I'm just being honest with respect to any hurdle that I faced, I mean, generally speaking, when I look past that hurdle, I look back on it and I just think, I've grown. I grew a lot through that, whether that be involving a relationship or not. So I can totally see that. One thing that, if I'm just being honest about, my relationship or our relationship that Mary and I have, I feel like the strongest points of those are when we're less judging of each other and
Mhm.
more in in support and truly just loving each other unconditionally. And I hear that term, like unconditional love, but what does it truly mean to live in an environment that's unconditional loving from a clinical perspective?
It's pretty darn hard. um, but what I would say is acceptance is the unconditional part of unconditional love. So, acceptance can sometimes get a bad rap because acceptance, some people think, well, that means I'm okay with anything. And it's a little bit of a paradox in my opinion, because acceptance is okay, here you are. I love you just the way you are. That was our first dance song, by the way, Billy Joel's song, for Pat and I. So I love you
Yeah,
just the way you are. Here you are. And at the same time, oh gosh, that one's hard for me, and that bugs me. Um, so, it's at once having those things, kind of that tension of those things together. But
right.
acceptance is, as you said, it's non-judgmental stance towards your partner. It's not trying to control your partner, even though there are some things we'd love to shift. I think a lot when I think about unconditional love, and as I said, acceptance is the unconditional part. I think about the serenity prayer.
Oh yeah.
And when we think about that, we often think about that with ourselves, but you can think about that with your partner as well. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the
Yep.
courage to change the things I can.
Yep.
Because there's some, like, acceptance doesn't mean, oh, I'm not going to say anything. It's just, okay, here it is, and what do I do with this? The
Right.
wisdom to know the difference, right?
Yep.
So that's my thought, if that makes sense.
No, totally does. Totally does. And you touched on your opening song that you and Pat danced to at your wedding, maybe appropriate time. You guys got married right before 9/11, 2001.
Hmm.
You had a very interesting um, road home from your honeymoon. I think it would be just appropriate to hear, maybe share a little bit about the love and support that you found Where were you in Canada? I can't remember exactly where.
We were in Gander, Newfoundland.
Gander, Newfoundland. I think it would be appropriate just to share some of the love and the support that you found when you found yourself there.
Yeah, so we were flying back from Europe on 9/11, and we were diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. We had never heard of it. And by the way, the Broadway musical Come From Away is about Gander, because the Gander's a teeny tiny town of, I think at the time it was like just under 10,000 or so, and one runway. And there were 38 planes that landed in Gander, and we doubled the size of the town. And the town welcomed us with open arms. They turned a hockey rink into a refrigerator. They had, we were stationed at a school with 4 total flights, and international planes are not small, so you can imagine how many were there. And townspeople just came in and would take us to go get a shower at their home. They made more food than we even needed. They kept bringing food. They took you to stores, they took you for rides, and we were fortunate to meet a woman named Stella, whom we are still in touch with 20 years later. Stella Brazel, and in Newfoundland, because it's Understand Newfoundland. They don't like it to be called Newfoundland,
Okay.
so it's Understand Newfoundland. Stella has a bit of an Irish brogue. That's the
Yeah.
accent up there, which is really
Yeah.
neat. And so she welcomed us into her home, and we met a couple of other folks as well. And all of us, it's a total of me, Pat, a couple, and Stella. So I guess it's 6 of us. We've had reunions all over the place. But at that time, it was an outpouring of love, salt of the earth people, barbecues, hikes. I wouldn't say it was a party, because it was obviously a very dark time in our country. But
In
it
the
was that,
world. The world.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was that coming together. It was
And you were
probably
there how long? For how long were you there for?
5 days.
Wow,
Hmm.
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was
That's
amazing.
Yeah, I love hearing that story. So you touched on some of the work from the Gottman Research Laboratory earlier.
Hmm.
I know they've done a lot of great work on just relationships and keys to relationships. Anything else that you think that you could share with our listeners that the Gottman Research Institute has uh, you know done, or that might benefit some of those that are listening today? Some
Yeah.
highlights.
Yeah, so what I would say, one, they have an incredible website. I think they have an app too. And so I would highly recommend going on there, Gottman. You can just look up John Gottman, and there's just a wealth of information at your fingertips, if you're interested in their work, because it's wonderful. Um, but if you find yourself falling into those 4 horsemen when you get into conflict, really working to get yourself out of that, because
Yeah.
those those criticism, contempt, those styles, stonewalling, those styles of negotiating conflict are predictive of divorce. So you kind of want to work on correcting that. Obviously, flipping your ratio. Um, but I think one of the most important things is just that knowledge that we have to be attentive to this. We cannot be on automatic pilot. I think of marriage as like, if you think about your bank account, you want to keep making deposits into your bank account so that you're in the black. And so that's that small things often, which their research kind of supports. It's that positive to negative ratio. Because if you just keep it on automatic pilot and you don't talk about things, even if you think, oh, we're good, we're not talking about anything, and the kids seem happy, but if you're not talking about your relationship, you're taking a lot of withdrawals.
Yep.
So you need to keep making those deposits, and I think that's the biggest takeaway they have there.
It's awesome. So I'd be remiss if I didn't, just bring up the role gratitude might have in one's relationship. I mean, is there any research on, the impact that just being grateful for your spouse in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis, and what role that might have in uh, strengthening the relationship that you're in?
Well, I think that that points to Gottman's work, but it's not just Gottman. There are other people that, couples therapists. One that I love is Esther Perel, Esther, Perel, Perel, and just this notion of naming what what you value in your partner. I think it's very much supported by the research, because if we focus on the criticism and that's and on criticizing our partner or what's not, just that negative, then that mindset really colors everything that review. We can kind of fall into that, and part of that is human, and so part of what we want to do is encourage bringing awareness to that.
Yes.
Oh, there I go. Pat and I have this unspoken agreement that when I cook, because I do most of the cooking, he cleans up. But sometimes he will leave a pot in the sink that needs to soak, and it will last longer than I think it needs to last. I could totally sit there and focus on the day he left the pot.
He probably heard that from me though, because I do that quite a bit. I must have told him that to leave the pot in there to
You
soak
leave the
soak it
pot
overnight.
soak. It's soaking overnight, and you're like, really? The water's cold. It's not needed anymore.
Yeah.
So I could sit there and I could focus on, gosh, he didn't clean up. Or I could focus on the times that, I call him Dynamo Pat, like where he does it. He expresses gratitude for my cooking, and he does it without question. So, where do I want my focus? What you focus on will grow. And
Yeah.
what we know is when you're focused on the good and or cultivating the good, you're going to be a generally happier person and certainly happier in your marriage.
Thank you, Cara. So as we wrap up, Cara, I've asked every one of my guests a similar question. I'd like to ask you this question, but really from the perspective of maybe one of your clients or patients that you worked with. So, and here's the question. So, can you think about somebody that you've worked with that really was dealing with tough situation, okay?
Mhm.
But after doing work with you and actually doing their work, they were able to come out of that situation like much stronger than coming into. And as a result of that, like work that they put into the hurdle that they were trying to climb, almost able to go back and look at that situation and say, gosh, you know what, doctor, I'm actually grateful that I was able to go through this situation because of how I've been able to grow, whether it be in relationship, career, you name the challenge. But I'd love to hear maybe if you have a client that perhaps you want to just talk about some of the experience that they had through going through that and if they might be grateful for it.
So, I am so privileged to work with the people I work with, because
Yeah.
I could probably pick the work I do. I'm very optimistic and hopeful that when someone comes to me and they're in pain, that they the only way out is through. So they're going to go through it and come out with hopefully some gratitude, hopefully in a better place.
Yep.
So one person comes to mind, but I want to protect confidentiality. Obviously,
Yep.
I wouldn't be saying that person's name, but
Yep.
I'm not going to give all the details. But this person had um, came in to see me because someone very, very dear to him had committed suicide. And it was just a horrific set of circumstances, and it had taken place um, in some place that this person held very dear, their home. And so talk about an earthquake. I mean, it was a bomb in this individual's life. And when he came in to see me, and he was just shattered, um, he had been drinking too much. He had not he'd been successful at work, but not the best situations at times, and was not connected to anyone romantically, and had lost his path with his faith. And when he came to see me, he said, "All right, Dr. Hurley, how long will it take me to get over this?" And I said, "You're never going to get over this, because we never get over loss. We carry the grief with us." But I said, "But if you put the work in, I think you will come out the other side and be in a better place."
Yep.
And so what I can say, and he references it, but never would, wishes that loved person was, that loved one was back in his life, of course. But he has been sober ever since then. He has, his words, killed it at work. He returned to his faith and the church, and met his future wife
It's awesome.
there.
That's
And
awesome.
so he would say, "Wow, I would never wish that, and wish I could undo what happened there. But I am so grateful."
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Listen, Cara, so grateful to have you on today's show. And that story you just shared is one example of the remarkable work that you're doing. You're impacting lives, you're impacting relationships, you're helping people spiral upward when they were potentially spiraling downward. And I know they're all grateful. Hopefully our listening audience picked up a nugget or two. I know I did. And I'm excited to incorporate some of this in. As we think about the Hallmark holiday, I ask all of our listening audience to, one, enjoy and have a special happy Valentine's Day with your spouse. But let's together do our best to try to make this excitement last longer than one day. And together, if we all have stronger relationships, the world would just be a much better place. I think about doing three things each and every day as I face the hurdles that I face, and one of those is quite clear. It's find the courage to be grateful, regardless of how powerful that storm is. Secondly, I think we all could be, if we just were a little bit more present to those we're with, we'd witness some amazing gifts that are right in front of us. So just be present to those you're with. And lastly, pay attention to how you're feeding your mind, body, and soul. Again, today's guest was my good friend, Dr. Cara Hurley. If today's show inspired you in some way, shape, or form, please subscribe to it, send it to a friend, and comment on it. Remember, with gratitude, Matt listeners, to have the courage to be grateful, regardless of how powerful the storm is. Godspeed, my friends.